Greetings from the cosmic horror. The stars are right once again, and the great old ones are announced to talk about for 30 plus minutes. H.P. Lovecraft, the horror writer who is a genre unto himself. I am your cosmic host, Mark Griffin, executive of the Lovecraft Estate on Yaga, joined in by two from the material world, David Guffey, a professor at Mispatonic University, and Richard Wilson, who wants to warn everyone about the Lovecraft industrial complex. Today's guest is Leeman Kessler, aka H.P. Lovecraft. Welcome, Mr. Kessler.
It's my absolute pleasure to be here.
For 10 years, you dressed up as Lovecraft and let people ask you questions via YouTube, and you answer them via YouTube. Yet you did not grow up reading Lovecraft.
That is very true. My brothers are about a decade older than me, and so I had a lot of sort of classic sci-fi and fantasy all throughout the house growing up. You know, Heinlein, Asimov, and the like. But Lovecraft was not on their sort of reading list. It wasn't on my parents' reading list. They were much more into Agatha Christie and Graham Greene and things like that. So as far as, being a young guy running around sort of, pulling books off shelves and discovering things, Lovecraft just wasn't on the list. I learned about Lovecraft. Well, specifically, I learned about Cthulhu from playing the old Steve Jackson card game, Illuminati, where the Servants of Cthulhu were one of the main factions. And then I even wound up getting, sometime in the 90s, the Lovecraft collectible card game Mythos. Again, had no idea who Lovecraft was, just thought, ooh, this looks fun. Amigo? Why, that looks like a fun creature. And then I even played the role-playing game in college and still had not read a single one of his stories. At that point, one of my friends had Lovecraft as like his like screen pick on AOL Instant Messenger. And so that was sort of the first time I ever saw him. And then I went to Canada when I got married and worked at a bookstore. And a friend of mine was like, look, Leeman, you have to read Lovecraft. He's phenomenal. You got to check him out. He's so important to everything with horror. Like, I was the horror guy at Blockbuster. I saw the Necronomicon movie with Jeffrey Combs playing H.P. Lovecraft and still had not read a single Lovecraft story. But it wasn't until I worked at this bookstore that I was like, okay, we have all these Lovecraft books. I'm just going to check this one out and read it and see what all the fuss is. I was like, okay, this is fun. I get this. This is okay. Now I see kind of what the kind of the big deal is. And then and then it's actually been longer than 10 years because it was, I think, around 2010 or 2011 when a friend of mine asked me to be in a stage play about Lovecraft. And that was the first time I donned his flesh suit and began prancing about as Lovecraft. So that was kind of my how I got into that whole scene.
And was that Monstrous Invisible?
That was Stephen Neer's Monstrous Invisible. Stephen worked with me at my bookstore, and I had been in a previous play with him. He had written a play all set at a LARP convention, which was dealt with horror themes and whatnot. And so he knew that I could play those kind of themes and play in that world and wasn't afraid of doing things a little out of the ordinary and in kind of sort of weird venues. And he remembers that. I don't remember it, but he remembers us having a conversation about Lovecraft and his wife. And, me introducing, saying, hey, you got to go check out Sonia Green. She's this fascinating figure. You should, go check her out. I think you'll find her interesting. And then from that conversation, he got the idea of writing a play about their brief marriage. And we did a sort of a very short 15 minute version of that play with my theater company in Toronto. And then we wound up doing a much longer, much longer, like 30, 40-minute version of the play. And that was what kind of really kicked me into gear as far as thinking him as a character and thinking him as this person that I enjoyed portraying and kind of getting into that suit and mindset as far as an actor. Obviously, there's a lot of things about Lovecraft personally that I don't necessarily like to embody, but he's a fascinating figure. He's full of contradictions, full of sort of just a weird history, a lot of public misconceptions about him. And as an actor, that's perfect. There's a never-ending supply of interesting takes and interesting sort of things that you can embody and play with in the midst of some of the more unpleasant, unsavory elements as well.
So what was the play like? Was it just like two people talking, or was there more going on?
Yeah, so the sort of the basic premise, it was kind of a bit dreamy. So, it starts with Lovecraft coming out of this sort of shadow and like after his death, like kind of talking about, this sort of nightmarish horror that's surrounding him. and then it kind of fades into him, his past and his meeting Sonia and interacting with her and sort of her coming into and out of his life over the years. And then play ends with them splitting, her needing to move on and him wanting to go back to Rhode Island, and they're just drifting apart. And then sort of returns back to that void. Like the whole thing had this kind of, dreamlike, somewhat nightmarish quality to it. And it was a lot of fun. And he's done a much bigger version, where I think like Nyarlathotep shows up. There's this sort of kind of like interlocutor like force that's like, pulling the strings and tormenting him. The version we did did not have the budget for, a third character. It was just the two of us.
So you had no involvement with the longer version?
No, by that point, I think I had left Canada. So, or if not, even if not, he had sort of moved to a different city and was part of kind of a different scene at that point. So I was not involved with that.
And so the guy who played Lovecraft in that one, how did he compare to you?
I never saw, so I'm sure he did a fantastic job. And I still, for the longest time, claimed the mantle of Canada's foremost Lovecraft impersonator. And now, of course, I say I'm Ohio's foremost Lovecraft impersonator. It's a small group. There's Jeffrey Combs. There's I think Chris Heyerdahl is another actor who's I think also Canadian, who portrayed Lovecraft. There's a very famous like clip. I think it was part of an anthology or something, but Chris Heyerdahl dressed up as Lovecraft and sort of, did this whole sort of bit, but they filmed it in black and white and they used kind of like grainy audio. So there were tons of folks who thought that was the actual Lovecraft for years because he did such a great job and they filmed it in this very period way. So there's been other stage plays and other adaptations that use Lovecraft as a character. And I think there's a whole musical, Lovecraft musical, that's out there. So there's a couple of us who have decided to step into that flesh mask for a little bit. And but I definitely did it for possibly the longest. I think doing the YouTube series from 2012 to this year, to this summer, and most consistently. I mean, for a long time, I was doing about 3 episodes a week. That was sort of the schedule I set for myself. And that's a lot. That's a lot of Lovecraft. I started putting together something of an archive just to kind of, list all the episodes in order and by date and all this stuff. And I still haven't completed it because there's over 1,000. I mean, I just, that 3 a week adds up.
I imagine that would. You first were asked to do a web series. Is that correct? As Lovecraft?
So yeah, so there was a YouTube a friend of mine who was on who had a YouTube show, or there was a precursor to YouTube, or like a competitor with YouTube. I can't remember what they were called now. And anyway, they had a show and they were doing Lovecraft, a whole summer of Lovecraft, and so they wanted to talk about, I think, the Charles Stross Laundry novels. They wanted to talk about some of the games. They wanted to talk about that's my dog entering the frame. They wanted to talk about
ominous door opens.
Precisely. Those are just the rats in the walls. Don't worry, just a handful of Zoogs. And and they had seen me do this play. They were part of the same LARPing scene that my friend Steven was part of. So they knew that, oh, hey, if I want to do Lovecraft, I know someone now who can do Lovecraft. And so I'm going to bring him in and film him just being in my kitchen, talking about these, his, responding to Reanimator or From Beyond or things like, or the to cast a deadly spell. I remember that was one of the films he reviewed. So there's another actor who's played a Lovecraft, although that version is of course very different. The steel-jawed gumshoe Lovecraft version. And so that was a lot of fun. That really, playing that character again and doing a bit, that was somewhat scripted, a little bit improv. That was, I think that was, May or so. We filmed early. We filmed kind of, I think, spring and whatnot. And so when I got into my mind that I wanted to do a web series, that was still fairly recent. So that was the immediate precursor to my being starting up Ask Lovecraft. And I folded that into the canon, the idea of this Canadian sorcerer resurrecting Lovecraft, so to do movie reviews. And I sort of played in that world.
So you started, you jumped over to Ask Lovecraft. And
so Ask Lovecraft. I'm trying to find the actual first episode date. Was June 26, 2012, and that was and I started up, and the very first episode is just me asking for questions, and I went to social media and other places and said, hey, I'm going to be doing this Lovecraft thing. If anyone's got questions for Lovecraft, let me know. I remember this dates me. I was thinking, where should I go? Where are like the Lovecraft people hanging out? I know, Yahoo groups. I went to like the Yahoo groups boards and like went through and was like, hey, is anyone interested in like asking Lovecraft a question? Like, I'd be happy to answer. And it worked out because like a handful of folks from that, ran with it and sent it around, and it got to the larger Lovecraft communities on Facebook and Twitter and elsewhere. And it just, bit by bit kind of took off. And after a while, I was like, oh, wow, people are actually watching this thing and sending in lots and lots of letters and lots of questions. I guess I'm going to keep doing this. And 10 years later, that was still going.
Now, you kind of portray Lovecraft as almost like somebody who's evolved, since his death, that his...
Well, it's interesting, right? Like I talk about, you never go full Lovecraft. I don't think the show is watchable if you try to be completely historically accurate. And it was a question, right? If you go back to those early episodes, I think I am trying to be a little bit like more shocking and play up some of that kind of, unsavory sides of things. But, part of it was the idea that this isn't just, Lovecraft in the 30s. This is Lovecraft in the 2010s and the 2020s, right? Like, what does that do? What happens if you are taken out of your time and, not only do you wake up, 80 years later, but it's 80 years later and you are a celebrity, you are known, you have a legacy, and a legacy that wasn't, what you left behind. And so I really wanted to play with that and the response to that. And yeah, I didn't want to make like Lovecraft, completely like recants of all of his odious views. And, like, cause that didn't feel honest. That didn't feel like that didn't feel like it was either honoring the person or those issues, right? Like, that's easy. It's easy to be like, oh, those other views, I absolutely, yes, I recant all of that, and I believe all the socially acceptable things to believe these days. It's, that's not interesting. But at the same time, I wasn't gonna be like, I'm going to double down and I'm going to tell you woke people what you've got wrong, because that also would just be intolerable and not fun. So it was a tightrope. It was a tightrope, and it especially comes across when I do my live shows. And my live shows, I'm taking unvetted questions from complete strangers, and you'll have folks who'll just be like, tell us about your cat, and things like that. And you've got to be able to respond in the moment and not just like suddenly, have a heated gamer moment, but you want to make sure that you're being funny, because this is a comedy show. This is not meant to just, bum everyone out by being like, let me give you a 3-hour explanation of why the Portuguese are not actually white. And, so, playing with that, right. And remembering that, this was a comedy, and I'm creating a caricature, a homunculus, and anytime anyone was just like, well, Lovecraft wouldn't have said that, or Lovecraft didn't sound like that, I could just always be like, well, this is Lovecraft of the 2010s. And like a bunch of like brainworms have like chewed at his skull, for decades. So what do you expect? People are going to change.
Sounds good. Now, you found Lovecraft fascinating, but didn't care too much for his stories, or found him okay.
Yeah. I mean, again, they're not the kind of things that I sort of be like, you know what? It's a Tuesday evening and I've got a nice glass of port. I'm going to sit down with some Dream Quest. Like I read them and found them interesting. And I go back from time to time and sort of like kind of explore, but it's not what I grew up with. I was much more on the Douglas Adams, Terry Pratchett, Neil Gaiman sort of stream. And, you imprint on stuff when you're young and you find stuff when you're older. And Lovecraft, I think, so many people discovered Lovecraft as teenagers and imprinted on him as teenagers. I do think he kind of speaks to that that developing mind in a lot of ways, right? The fact that he's got a story called The Outsider, I think there's one of my friends was talking about how the idea of Lovecraft, maybe not Lovecraft himself, but the idea of Lovecraft is kind of this nerd, right? This idea of this kind of self-taught autodidact, like, very, precocious and sort of brilliant, but also like not never formally educated, didn't go to college, was learning things on the fly, drawing monsters in his notebook. I mean, it reads like your freaks and geeks, Dungeons and Dragons playing, story. And so, Lovecraft, or again, this idea we have of Lovecraft as this kind of, loner shut away talking about monsters and things like that, it matches what I think a lot of people's, middle school, high school experience at least felt like. Whether it is the reality, that's up to someone else.
There is one story that seems to have resonated with you of his, Sweet Ermengarde.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Sweet Ermengarde is so fascinating because it is so unlike anything else he wrote. And so when people ask, what's the best story, or what should I read? I jokingly say Sweet Ermengarde. And I do that because I think, if you read Sweet Ermengarde, you realized, like there's more here than just, an antiquarian, writing letters and digging through old New England archives and discovering something terrible about his ancestors. There's a sense of humor. My show really changed when I began reading his letters. I'd done some research for playing him on the stage play, but I hadn't got a hold of his letters until I realized that there were a whole bunch of them the published versions and annotated versions of his letters in the Toronto library system. And I went one day and just sat down and began reading through a bunch of them. And they were so funny. Like, he had such a sense of humor. He was so kind of self-deprecating, but also catty, and dishing on other writers, and just there was a personality there. And it's very different from what I think the pop mentality of Lovecraft is, right? I think there is this image of Lovecraft, and largely it's based on Lovecraft's own self-deprecation, right? As this shut away misanthrope, sitting in an attic, kind of glowering at the world, not wanting to have anything to do with anyone or anybody, but just wanted to be left alone to his books and his monsters. And the reality is a guy who, sat on the park and wrote his stories, and then wrote letters to dozens of correspondents across the country, to people that he was interested in and wanting to connect with. And it's, and he was telling jokes, and he was, trying to connect them with other people and help them in their careers, and offering advice and traveling to meet them. He was social and outgoing and gregarious in a way that doesn't match the kind of pop cultural, image we have of this, kind of glowering, stern-faced, jutting jawed, just sort of, misanthrope.
So how did you find the voice for Lovecraft?
The actual voice itself was born out of necessity, because I had to have something that I could, project on stage without kind of throwing out my voice, but also not be just so completely comic. that kind of broad New England accent is easy to do, but it's not particularly compelling when you're trying to do sort of like a drama. And so the voice that kind of came out was this, I call it sort of Fraserian. It's got that kind of, Fraser Crane, sort of, it's, there's a bit of that transatlantic quality to it. It's clipped, much of it, it's in the sort of back of the throat, but you're still using a great deal of the tongue and the front of the mouth as well. And it's meant to be able to, evoke a whole lot of different ideas. It's not supposed to be sort of set in one particular place or time. Now, if I were being really pedantic and really, trying to be accurate to what Lovecraft was, based on letters and what we know, he probably would have been a lot more high pitched and reedy. It would have been like, oh, the thing about monsters and Cthulhu is they come at you from all your nightmares. And that's, that might be more accurate, but probably less fun to listen to on a 3 times a week web series, or in a even in a 20-minute stage play.
So were you playing with your voice as a kid, making it sound different?
Oh yes. Oh yeah. No, I was definitely, that kind of that doing, mimicking folks I saw in movies. I remember hours and hours and hours spent playing the LucasArts Secret of Monkey Island game, doing all like these different ranges of voices. And yeah, voice acting was something that I was always very interested in, and got into more and more as I got older. And it's something I still really enjoy doing. I love doing audiobooks. I love doing podcasting. I love just playing with my voice and getting to do lots of different fun things with it. And it's part of why eventually there wound up being so many more characters on the Ask Lovecraft web series, was that I wanted to play with different voices and play with different energies and styles. And so that's how you wind up with Carl Sagan suddenly becoming a recurring character, or Lovecraft having this weird, like, Louisiana doppelganger evil twin. It was something different and something fun to kind of play with.
So you kind of look like Carl Sagan. So did you like also play with that as well?
I look like Carl Sagan when I can, like, puff out when my hair is grown out. I'm gonna close that door. And Sagan that came out of a different stage play that I did, where in Toronto, where as a throwaway gag, there was like a secondary character, and they're like, "Can you do it like Sagan?" I was like, "Oh, let me see if I can find Carl Sagan somewhere in the back of my throat," and that was fun. And I just decided that I'm going to do some more Carl Sagan, and then I've done Carl Sagan for other improv shows. There's the sort of a Chautauqua readings that we do out here, and I've done Sagan for that, and he's a lot of fun. I like doing Sagan.
Did you have to do a lot of research on him as well, or like...
Yeah, I did. And of course, watched a lot of Cosmos. And I mean, Sagan was interesting because, he's one of these larger than life characters that, as I was researching him, I was finding out, sort of things, real truths about him that were way sillier and wackier than the stuff I was trying to come up with to make fun of him. Like, okay, well, this is a person who's sort of beyond parody in some ways, but always very fun. The sort of opposite version of that was I did a show as Peter Sellers and did a lot of research on Peter Sellers, and that was a bummer, man. The more you learn about Peter Sellers and Peter Sellers' life, you're like, oh man, like, say what you will about Lovecraft, like, at least there was something there. He was just, wasn't just kind of this gaping black void of sadness.
And then a PH Lovecraft. What was the motivation of having like this evil brother?
Well, it came out of the fact that, shortly after I started the series, I took a vacation and I didn't shave. And when I came back, I had, some facial hair, and I thought, oh, would it be funny if I sort of, just took out, put on the Spock goatee and did an evil twin. And, there's no trope I'm not willing to shamelessly mine for content. And so, the idea, okay, what's the opposite of H.P. Lovecraft? Well, it'll be P.H. Lovecraft. Okay, and what's the opposite of, like, sort of an uptight New Englander? Well, it'd be a sort of a vivacious Southerner. And I'm from Tennessee. I'm not from whatever part of the South PH's voice comes from, but I'm from the South, and so I was able to kind of draw on a little bit of stuff there. And that was something that I realized very quickly. It allowed me to offer up commentary on Lovecraft, not as Lovecraft. So, one of the first episodes I did that tackled Lovecraft's racism head on was as PH, and allowed me to, like, play with these themes, play with, having this kind of outside observer in a way that would have been very strange to have, like, Lovecraft himself commenting on. And he was just a fun foil to Lovecraft and able to irritate Lovecraft. Very quickly, I introduced Leeman Kessler, the hapless producer, as a character, and sort of like the Scooter to the Muppet Show, and being able to be harassed by both HP and PH in very different ways as this hapless Leeman Kessler was a lot of fun. And again, just let me play in this world in different ways, and find different energies and different methods of engaging with this material.
You dress a little more relaxed when you play like Leeman Kessler. Is that something you actually wear out in public?
So that my Aloha shirt,
yeah.
I don't wear that except when I'm going on vacation and trying to annoy my wife by looking like a stereotypical like dad on vacation.
Uh, there have been times when PH is like appeared off camera. He'll like say something. Is that something you add in like afterwards, or how's that done exactly?
Yeah, so that was the other thing, was that, doing the PHHP business allowed me to play with editing and play with, having conversations, right? You could have kind of a back and forth. And yeah, I would either film, two separate things and kind of stitch them together, especially if there's like, a action reaction kind of business, or I would, film Lovecraft, and then like there'd be silences, and then I would go in and record PH's audio and put that in. And figuring out the timing of that was always challenging. My goal with the show, and what I sort of told myself was, look, if I make the show really complicated with lots of editing and lots of like actual technical proficiency and whatnot, I'm never going to do it because it's going to take forever and I'm going to talk myself out of it. So I needed to make it as low impact as possible, which is why almost everything is one shot, because then I don't have to edit anything. All I have to do is clip the beginning and end and put it up, and that's it. When you start having multiple, I had a lot of takes because doing it all in one shot is a challenge. If you flub something, you got to start the whole thing over again. But it was a great acting exercise and a great acting challenge, and I really liked it, and I enjoyed playing with that. And then yeah, whenever I had to do something with different characters and stitch these all together, it definitely made things a bit more technically challenging for me. But I did that sparingly. I think there's one episode where I swap between characters in camera all in the same take, because it's about masks. And they're wearing a mask, and the mask is swapping, and the costumes are swapping. And as this costumes change, the voice changes. And that's like the only sort of time, sort of it breaks the fourth wall and acknowledges, the kind of what's going on. But it's all within the kind of the sphere of, it's the mask doing the talking, not the actual person. And that was a very fun acting exercise of flowing between all these different characters, and going from Lovecraft to PH to Leeman and back again. And then later on, right towards the end of the whole arc, I did an episode where it was each of the characters playing different characters. So you had like HP being Carl Sagan, and Carl Sagan being PH, and PH being Leeman, and Leeman being Chaboy, and all. And it was, that was a ton of fun, but also, was a little strange.
That sounds like a Black Mirror episode or something. Orphan Black episode.
Well, yeah, and yeah, having to pretend to be someone who is pretending to be someone who is technically you, but anyway.
All right, Ed. You made a comment, like in other interviews and stuff like that. It's easy to dehumanize Lovecraft. He's an antisocial racist, but you don't praise him, but you admire his humanity. You said he's not a misanthrope. I was wondering if you could explain about his humanity. Usually you don't consider like a racist as being very humanitarian.
Well, okay, no, I guess there's a difference between humanitarian and human. And I think an issue with Lovecraft and either criticism or fanishness of Lovecraft is that it erases his essential humanity, and it erases the complexity and the nuance of who he is, right? You have a lot of folks who, again, want to view Lovecraft either on this pedestal as this, great genius, living in his attic and just churning out, visionary works that transformed literature. And that ignores his humanity, and it ignores his connection to the literary world around him, right? Lovecraft was the first person to tell you that he was standing on the shoulder of giants, and that he was, riffing off of what Poe did and what Arthur Machen did, Dunsany, Ambrose Bierce, all these writers that came before him. Robert W. Chambers. I mean, poor Robert W. Chambers, is barely remembered outside of certain fan communities. Whereas, if you talk about Carcosa or Hastur, The King in Yellow, folks will be like, oh, right, I think that Lovecraft story. It's like, no, that's not that, And so, Lovecraft was part of an ecosystem and was, he and his fellow writers were exchanging letters and were critiquing each other's works and playing in the same space, right? Like they were referencing each other and referencing each other's monsters and sharing, like they were all kind of, scrabbling in the toy chest together. And that's lost if you kind of try to paint Lovecraft as this, this solitary, titan of literature. And then, of course, there's the criticism of his bigotry and the criticism of his racism and his social views. And that, that also can erase a lot of his essential humanity and sort of just treat him as this monster who, just is sort of slavering away in a corner or cowering in fear of, everyone and anyone. And so, I don't shy away from his bigotry. I wrote an entire sort of essay, called "On Portraying a White Supremacist," where I talk very, very openly and candidly about the challenge of stepping into that role and playing this person and trying not to erase that part of him or ignore that part of him, or make my performance of him a celebration of those qualities. Because I mean, the reality is there are folks out there who don't ignore Lovecraft racism, but do indeed praise him for it and read him and celebrate him because of those views. And that's not great. So I think it's very important that, you sort of stand up and you draw those kind of lines. But at the same time, I don't think that means that we cannot read Lovecraft or enjoy Lovecraft or play in that world or indeed dress up as him and explore the themes that he embodied. You just have to be very careful about it and sensitive to it and be willing to have the conversation whenever it comes up. I think there's a very two-dimensional image of quote unquote cancel culture, where folks worry that any criticism is somehow saying all these books have to be thrown on the fire, as opposed to, no, they just mean we have to be aware of this and be aware of this impact and understand, what Lovecraft said and did and very openly believed, while also sort of being aware of the context in which he lived, the community in which he moved in, and of course how things changed, right? I'm one of the folks who do think that the kind of deathbed confession is overplayed in the Lovecraft world. I think there's a lot of folks who really want to believe that he was just on the verge of getting better and turning it around, and had he just lived a little bit longer, then he wouldn't be as problematic a figure. I don't think that's true. I think he still was, even as he was getting better, he was still pretty bad, even for the 1930s. But he is who he was, and that can't change. Lovecraft cannot get better. But we can wrestle with it, and our understanding of Lovecraft and our ability to have conversations about Lovecraft can get better and can become more nuanced and can be improved by, bringing in a lot more voices and a lot more folks who have historically kind of, been boxed out of these conversations, even though, Black writers, female writers, queer writers have been a part of fandom, have been a part of weird literature and weird fiction from the get-go. Like it's not like they're suddenly, showing up. They've always been there. It's just the prevalence and their access to the toy box has often been limited.
True. When people send you questions, how do you pick which ones to to answer?
Yeah. So it really depended. When I was doing this three times a week, I kind of had a very, sort of set schedule, so, Saturday night, I would go through my emails and I would kind of look through and be like, all right, what's a question that's interesting, that's not too similar to one I just recently asked or answered, that I can it can take some inspiration from. And there were some that would sit in my inbox for months because, nothing really would spark. And then suddenly, I'd see something or read something and be like, okay, I can finally go back and answer that question about Scooby-Doo. I know what Lovecraft will think about Scooby-Doo. And then, yeah, I would, so I'd pick a question, I'd mull it over. I'd think, okay, can I hit one or two beats with this? And then I'd sleep. And that's where the real work would be done. And when I took the shower the next day, that's where like a lot of the quote unquote writing was happening. And, I'd make sure I could get, 3 or 4 points that are interesting and entertaining or thought provoking. And then, Monday, I would film. Oh, sorry, not Monday. Sunday I would film, and edit and upload, and then Monday it would go out. That Monday night I would go and check another email, pick a question. Tuesday I would film, put it out, and then that process would continue. Wednesday, Tuesday going into Wednesday, Wednesday going into, or Thursday going into Friday. I'd have a little bit of a break on Saturday, and then I'd be back. Then Saturday night, pick another question, back to filming on Sunday. It was it was a churn, and I was in it, and I was in that mind space, all week long. When I eventually found myself the father of 2 kids and the mayor of a small village in Ohio, I realized, okay, maybe I need to start tamping the brakes a little bit. And so around 2018 or 2019, I went down to just doing it once a week, which was a huge change. It was a huge gear shift, suddenly not doing this 3 times a week. And that was 2019. Dear Lord, I did this for such a long time. And it was interesting. In some ways, it was really challenging because instead of this kind of being in my head, all week long, now, Saturday I'd look at a question, and Sunday I'd film it, and it would go out Monday, and it would kind of go out of my head. And then Saturday would show up and be like, oh crap, I got to do this again. And like, I'd have to, get the engine running from a cold start. And so it was a very different process. But it was interesting because, so many of the questions I got were pop culture related. Dear Mr. Lovecraft, what do you think about G.I. Joes, Transformers, the gummy bears? That people really wanted to, see Lovecraft responding to pop culture in different ways. And this became very challenging when a lot of anime fans, because there's a big anime Lovecraft crossover, would ask me very specific questions about anime that I do not have any familiarity with, nor do I really want to like go watch a 30 hour Lotus Wars or something from the 80s that's I got to go find on Betamax or something. And so yeah, there were a lot of questions that went unanswered. Of course, I sort of told myself, if folks really want to get something answered, they can come to the live show, and then they can trap me, and I'll have nowhere to run, and I'll have to come up with some answer. But yeah, I was trying to find a wide variety of questions, things that were different, things that appeal to my aesthetic and my sense of like, okay, what'll be fun to talk about, and what'll be what'll be a bummer, so we maybe don't want to deal with this. Although there were a couple of serious questions that I got that I try to find answers for. I remember early on, one of the first, and serious questions I got was from a young woman, who talked about, my boyfriend and I, we love all your work. And I understand that you died of cancer, and my boyfriend has cancer and is dying. Like, what can you speak to that experience? I'm like, oh, well, like, I didn't want to just delete, walk away. Like, that's not the kind of thing you sort of want to just sort of leave hanging. But at the same time, like, I have not had cancer. I do not have people in my life at that time who had cancer. So I didn't want to like speak out of turn. And nor, I think, Lovecraft's actual response was, when he was going through last periods of life was, ow, this hurts. I hate this. Like, it wasn't particularly edifying. Like, he wasn't, really sort of poetically addressing the moment, which is understandable. So, I very truthfully and seriously said, in situations like that, there are no words. That's a place where words fail, and there is just, those kind of situations are shared by those in our lives, but there's nothing that can really be said. And as I've gotten older, I realized, yep, that still holds up.
There was one episode where you got your wife to answer instead, and one about coming out.
Yeah, that was it's, again, we're getting towards the end of the series and the end of the run. And as you're talking, you asked the question earlier about progressive Lovecraft, or do I have to find ways to make Lovecraft more tolerant or acceptable to social 21st century society. And that was definitely one where because my wife has such a big, as a college chaplain, she has a lot of experience, working with students and young people who are coming out or struggling with coming out or communicating it with their friends and their family. I thought, this is a topic that is worth addressing and is worth having a professional address, not, Lovecraft, making either embarrassing comments or outdated references, or flipping, riding it on a skateboard with his hat backwards, being like, "Hey, kids, let's have real talk."
Didn't get PH to answer, did you?
Not that one. Although I think there were questions about PH and his sexuality that popped up from time to time, maybe on some of the live shows. But yeah.
And she's an Episcopal priest, right?
That is correct. Yeah, we were up in Canada, so she was ordained into the Anglican Church of Canada, and then when we came back to Ohio, that was the Episcopal Church, thanks to the Revolutionary War and all that shakeup.
Okay, and I understand that y'all do like a podcast or a video cast together at one time.
Yeah, so before and during Ask Lovecraft, we had a podcast called Geekly Yoked. Really terrible search engine optimization, but it was a lot of fun. We talked about spirituality and fandom, and books we were reading and how it sort of intersects with pop culture and religion. Our high water mark was somehow getting Doug Jones to come on our show and talk with us about Pan's Labyrinth and things like that, the Hellboy series. So that was a lot of fun. I mean, I've done lots of these different sort of projects over the years, and what amazed me about Ask Lovecraft was the fact that it lasted so long. Like, I have a lot of these kind of flash in the pan, things that I've done or I've tried. Before I did Ask Lovecraft, I used to do Christopher Walken impersonations on YouTube. So that was my first foray at attempting to, make use of this medium. And now we're both on TikTok, and we find that TikTok works very well because you can do lots and lots and lots and lots of different things. And, I can do some Lovecraft there. I can do politics and talk about, running for office in your local community. I can talk about gaming. I can, share clips from the Denzel Washington Macbeth, like I did earlier today. You can do lots of, it's just a panoply of different things. And you can engage with, a truly tremendous audience. I mean, I've now done stuff on TikTok that, in one day and like a 20-second clip reached more people than 10 years of Ask Lovecraft ever did. And that's, both astonishing and exciting, but also like, oh, wow, okay, that puts things in perspective.
A whole different world. Were there any questions that you refused to answer?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure there are a lot of questions I refuse to answer. Whether they come to mind, I don't know. Again, a very, very specific questions, about either pop cultural events that just weren't funny or weren't interesting, or there's, I'm not going to go out and watch every sort of random TV show that folks are are wondering Lovecraft's view on. Although I did watch a very fascinating, very dark German animated movie, Felidae, which is all about like cats and genetic experimentation, and it's sort of like Watership Down, but like it's also something of a noir. And the reason I thought it would work, and it did work, is because Lovecraft and his love of cats and all things feline. So I was able to get a lot of content and a lot of play out of that. But that was probably the like most far afield research, to answer a question that I was willing to kind of go into.
Now, when you try to answer a question, did you go, what would Lovecraft say? Or did you try to think of an answer, then figure out how Lovecraft would answer it?
No, I think I would, how this character of Lovecraft that I have, stitched together and Frankenstein would answer, so part of it is thinking, all right, how would the historical Lovecraft kind of play into this, but also based now on this kind of body of work that I've created and this kind of consistent character, this consistent tone that I've developed over the last, however long, that really informed my, again, sort of writing. The show was very improvised. I would get up in front of the camera. I would have a few beats in my mind that I would want to hit, either bad puns that I knew I could easily make, or references to stuff in Lovecraft's life, or just completely off the wall kind of random gags. And then I would stitch them I would just get in front of the camera and just sort of see where the spirit moved.
There was a few episodes I've watched of yours, and one that kind of stood out to me when you talk about the films of Tom Hanks and how you made the allegation that they're based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft, and like splash being shot over Innsmouth.
Now, see, it's funny because like the fever dream of doing this project, I vaguely remember making that joke. I couldn't tell you anything else about the rest of that episode. I made so many of these so quickly that when I was going back and doing this archiving project, I would just be like, I don't remember this. Like my brain completely just like flushed this out of memory to make room for the next stupid joke. And sometimes I'd be like, "Ooh, that was not great. That was probably not a joke I need to make." And a lot of times I was like, "Hey, that's actually pretty funny. This guy's not bad. You should do more of this."
So it's like watching somebody else at that time.
Well, it's interesting, right? You talk to folks who talk about, oh, they can't stand, hearing their voice, or when they see themselves, on film or camera or whatnot. I'm a narcissistic enough actor that I've never had a problem with that. But I did get to a point where if I ever, especially when I was doing podcasting or interviews and things like that, and I listened to my actual speaking voice, like, oh, that doesn't sound right. But hours and hours of me like talking as Lovecraft, that's fine. That doesn't impact me at all. That's perfectly natural at this point.
Some of the things you talked about was like about Lovecraft's legacy being plushies.
Yes. That I got a lot of that, and that was really good for my live show. When I was about a year into the show, my theater company in Toronto, we got a slot for the Toronto Fringe, which are very hard to get. The Toronto Fringe, big summer festival there in Toronto, and they have even their sort of small little tiny stages are fiercely fought over. So our company put in a bid for it without having a show, just put in a bid and managed to get it. And like, okay, we need something that can fit in this tiny little, cube. Like, Leeman, do you want to do Lovecraft? Do you want to do like a live Lovecraft show? And I had tried doing Lovecraft live at a con, and it worked somewhat okay. But I was like, okay, I think I can do this, but it's hard to improvise for like a full hour. Can we try to like stitch something together? And so my producer and writer DJ, he went through and watched every episode that existed at the time, which was not the full 1,500 or whatever it's at right now, was still a lot. And they put together this sort of kind of stand-up bit, essentially, kind of like a top 10 of questions. I read off of an index card, and I had I don't know if it was a plushie Cthulhu. I think it was the My Little Cthulhu that John Kavalik made. And I halfway through the show, I like pull off like a curtain and reveal this little like bubbly faced Cthulhu, and I go into this giant rant about Lovecraft's writing being commercialized and stolen and used to make plushies and all this stuff. Of course, with the final joke being that the real problem is that he wasn't getting paid for it. So
yeah, not getting any royalties. For him. And that kind of segues into like your warnings about the Lovecraft industrial complex and the McDonald arches of horror.
That's right. Well, this is where like Lovecraft and myself, we are in sort of agreement, right? I mean, Lovecraft, part of why he didn't do well was that he sort of refused to kind of play a lot of the commercial games. He was not interested in writing to popular taste, and he had a big distaste at the idea of kind of commercialization, of seeing stuff just being kind of sold and marketed. And to some degree, I think he would have been horrified at the way he has become a marketing brand and a merchandising brand. And I'm sure, again, if it was paying his hospital bills, he probably wouldn't complain too loudly. But, I think that is something to kind of be aware of, particularly as we have conversations about Lovecraft and his bigotry and things like that. I think there's one side of folks who say, you don't want to say anything about it because it's you're taking money to, you've written Lovecraft anthologies or Lovecraft games, how dare you then insult him and denigrate him? You're just as bad as, for accepting that money. Whereas I sort of take the approach that if you are playing in that world, and if you are, profiting off of Lovecraft, if you are profiting off his legacy, it's beholden to have these honest conversations. Doesn't mean you have to just, every week go out and talk about how much you hate Lovecraft. But you don't want to take the money and treat it like hush money or an NDA, right? You want to be able to talk openly and honestly, even about, stuff that is both problematic and, also your livelihood. I think that's the responsible way to engage with with it because it's a huge moneymaker. You go to Kickstarter and you look up, Cthulhu or Lovecraft or anything related, and you'll find dozens of games and books and plushies and all sorts of stuff. Folks, he's recognizable, and in a way that Robert W. Chambers and Ambrose Bierce aren't.
There was a catchphrase that I would hear you utter from time to time in your show. It's like 10 times your body weight in sugar.
Oh yes. that was a nice recurring gag about what Lovecraft needed to be reanimated. I really loved it. So at some point, someone put together a TV tropes page for the show, and I saw that they had as one of the tropes, don't say the Z word. You can't say zombie. Like Lovecraft refused to be called a zombie, refused to be called anything like that. He was undead. I think even undead he was squeamish about, but reanimated, because we have reanimator, reanimated. It's more statesman-like. And yes, the recurring theme was that to maintain his reanimated status, he required 10 times his body weight in sugar, like a hummingbird. Yeah. And of course, Lovecraft was a notorious for loving sugar and putting in poisonous amounts of sugar into his coffee and like just mainlining donuts. And I mean, that was part of his weird lifestyle choices, which I'm sure did not help his latter day health issues.
Yeah, I'm sure that contributed to his death. All the his poor eating habits. I did notice one error when I was watching some of your episodes. You said Lovecraft never saw television, and actually he had.
That's right. I've learned from my friend Bobby Deary that Lovecraft at either an exhibition or some such had a chance to see a television, and I think he even recorded. Not I don't think there's a video recording. I think he did make an audio recording that was eventually subsequently burned or destroyed. So in theory, there could have been some Lovecraft recordings floating around out there. But they did not make it to the modern day, which means that whatever voice I'm using, no one can say is not canon because they weren't there.
No one can contradict you unless you get a time machine or something.
Precisely.
Yeah. As if that wasn't enough, you also created Lovecraft After Dark.
Yeah, well, this came out of the fact that, I like interviews. I like talking to folks. I like engaging with the community. And one of the best things to come out of doing Ask Lovecraft is getting folded into this community, which again, I didn't have a lot of experience with because I was not a Lovecraft fan growing up or, in college or anything. And so, I was approaching it sort of orthogonally as this actor and artist, and kind of got grafted onto this amazing community of filmmakers and artists and authors. And I've had some truly amazing friendships come out of this work. I mean, that's, beyond anything else, that's been one of the greatest joys of all of this. And yeah, Ask Lovecraft After Dark was a way to try to engage with the friends I'd made, through the Lovecraft world, and also with the fan base that had kind of developed over time, finding ways to kind of engage with folks who are watching the show. I'm, was trying to find ways, either through, social media can be very limiting. I had a Patreon account, which had, we sort of try to have kind of back and forth there, but, that's kind of a, almost like a newsletter, that there's not a lot of back and forth. And with After Dark, I was able to kind of have a live chat show for a while. And, back when Google Hangouts was a bit more friendly and user friendly. And it allowed me to interview folks or talk and have kind of a, live questions in the midst of all that. Again, this is a place where TikTok has been interesting because, with TikTok lives and things like that, you're able to recreate a little bit of that and have a kind of an ongoing conversation, an immediate conversation with folks. And I found that a lot of fun. And the After Dark there may be more of those coming, depending on the schedules of friends and whatnot, because that is a lot of fun. And I've got to speak to some real heroes doing that, because once you're like, I'm a serious person with who does interviews. Would you like to appear on this program that's not just me in my library talking into my laptop? I'm a serious person. And you can, I got to talk with Bill Slavichek, who's an amazing game designer who designed so many of the like Star Wars role-playing and games and did so much work that, I grew up with. I got to talk with, great writers and filmmakers and folks who, create art that I love and I can geek out and fanboy out about. And while also, being a very serious person and serious interviewer, and it's the best of both worlds.
There was one interview we were curious about because it's almost like the person you're going to interview didn't decide not to show up until halfway through, and it was like Cody Goodfellow.
Yes. Oh man. So Cody is a writer, an actor, musician. He made the "Baby Got Bass" music video that I briefly appear in, and yeah, I think that was with before in the pre-Zoom era. We weren't all in the pre-pandemic era. We didn't all have our home setups and our ability to do these kind of remote interviews, all, ready to go, at a moment's notice. And so I think he was having some severe phone phone issues out in the Pacific Northwest. And so in that case, because they were live, I would sort of just be vamping and have to vamp for long stretches of time. But Cody is a strange, fun fellow. He, for the longest time, ran the Cthulhu prayer breakfasts at the H.P. Lovecraft Film Festival. He had like a full religious attire and would come out and with his various hierophants and high priests and acolytes, and you would have a delightful religious experience.
Now, you were involved with the prayer breakfast at one time, weren't you?
Yes, I believe I was exercised at one. I think they decided they were going to exercise Lovecraft, or at least exercise Lovecraft's problematic history, or something like that. It mostly involved me like screaming and writhing around, which I'm good at, so it worked out.
Okay. I was kind of curious what they meant by exercising Lovecraft. I didn't exactly know what they meant by that, but
this was, I think, in the midst of the World Fantasy Award back and forth and debates, and so I think this was Cody's way of dealing with a lot of these controversies is with humor and ridiculousness, a kind of Dadaist way of acknowledging controversy and acknowledging these difficult conversations while not getting too bogged down in the seriousness of it, because there was a lot of conflict, and there was a lot of hurt feelings and back and forth, and it's like any community, you every now and then have to kind of find ways to step back and figure out, okay, what are we in this for and what matters. And Cody figured with Lovecraft folks, you can't go wrong with a good exorcism.
And one person you interviewed was Evan Stevens, who is very important to your show.
Yeah, that was an amazing gift. Evan approached me with music he had written, in sort of Lovecraftian music inspired by Lovecraft, and he said, hey, like, you can make use of this however you like. And I'm like, well, at some point YouTube kind of offered this feature whereby at the end of your episodes you could have like little preview videos, like little boxes, like, and for 20 seconds they would stay up and folks could click on that or click on the subscribe. And so I was like, oh, I want to make use of that, but like, I don't want like boxes to appear over my face while I'm still talking. Like that's not ideal. And so for a long time, it just, would go to like subscribe box, and there would just be silence and blackness, for that 20 seconds. But then I realized, oh, I can have music at the end of all these and make use of that and have like, showcase different music and pick music that matches the tone or the mood of every episode. And he had like a dozen different songs, so I could cycle through a whole bunch of them, and it was a lot of fun. And and then so when the show was wrapping up, I had him on to talk about being a part of the cast member, off screen with the music. And so I was so dependent and so grateful on a lot of different artists coming to my aid and supporting the show. My friend Matt did the little kind of picture of Lovecraft in the Precious Moments style, I was obsessed with Precious Moments as like a comedy goldmine. There were so many different projects where like, this would be so much better if it was as a Precious Moments baby. And so when I was coming up with an icon to be the Lovecraft, my friend Matt offered to do it because he had his own webcomic at the time. And I was like, all right, well, can you do Lovecraft, like Precious Moments Lovecraft? He's like, I guess so. And so that's been the little face, the YouTube thumbnail for 10 years. I remember when I first started, a friend, this person who became a friend named Leslie reached out, being like, "Hi, I see that you've started this show, and I see the art that you use, and it's interesting. I'm an actual artist. Can I can I make this look good? She said it much more politely. But she came up with almost any design you see, the Lovecraft posters, the Lovecraft art on the YouTube site or on the Facebook page, my business cards. She Leslie Harker, she did some fantastic work, and I still go back to her, even like on TikTok, we were designing T-shirts for my sort of always has been compendium of Ohio weirdness, and I got her to design the T-shirt for that. I had her design, like when I ran for village council, she like made little business cards for running for village council. She is definitely my go-to for anything graphic design, because it's going to be me and paint otherwise.
When you're saying paint, you mean like a Microsoft Paint? Or
I yes, precisely.
Yeah. And who's the little child who asked at the beginning?
That is a young man, an older man now, named Liam, who his mother and I went to college together. We did theater together. We produced a stage adaptation of Terry Pratchett's Mort back in 2004. And she still lives in the area, and I still see her from time to time. But when I was starting my show, I sent out a request, hey, does anyone like have a small child who'd be willing to record, Ask Lovecraft? Because again, I had this idea of like the precious moments, Lovecraft face, and then the idea of like, the show starting with like a little kid just being like, Ask Lovecraft, just being this, I don't know. It was 2012. We were all of us making interesting choices aesthetically and otherwise. And so she got her son Liam. She like cornered him and made him talk into a microphone. And I was like, all right, that's great, love it, I'll use it. And 10 years later, I'm still using it.
So just one take.
It just yeah. I think there was like a bit of a pause. I think he was just like, Ask Lovecraft. So I like squished them together just so And that's definitely I definitely had a lot of people be like, this makes the show really hard to binge watch, because every 3 minutes you're getting this high pitched child shouting at you. But I don't know, that speaks to my weird sort of Andy Kaufman-esque what like just strangeness that informs the rest of the show. If you can't get over a small child and precious moments art, you're not going to enjoy what comes next. I'm sorry.
It gives it a charm, I have to say. Another guest you had on was Louis Lovehog. Is that how you say his name?
Yeah, so he's known. He does Linkara, Top the Fourth Wall. We worked together when I was on Channel Awesome for a brief period, and then we both departed that channel around the same time. And we've collaborated on lots of different stuff. I worked with him on his he did like these kind of Halloween big specials, and so he brings me in to be a scary narrator to talk about all the spooky comic books and movies coming soon. And we worked on a really fun collaborative project. The Voice from the Dark?
Voice from Beyond.
Voice from Beyond. Thank you very much. I can never remember the title. But it was a lot of fun. And it was a lot of us who had been part of Channel Awesome. And, we're sad to kind of lose that collaboration and lose that connection. We wanted to do sort of a big thing to kind of, get the band back together. And I had a lot of fun with that. That was Louis is an incredibly sweet guy, incredibly supportive. So, everyone over at Channel Awesome who was part of that. We're such a great team. I jumped in very late. I was a very different kind of program from a lot of the, long form review shows they had. They did not have just these like 3-minute Lovecraft answering questions. Like that was not a thing that the audience were quite used to. But they were all incredibly sweet, incredibly supportive. And I really cherish the friendships that I got to make over there.
Now, for that audio drama, Voice from Beyond, did you regret not seeing the time warp with everybody else?
Well, the problem was, of course, that all got like taken down with copyright, and I think they had to. Oh man, they had to scramble and either find some replacement, because they were wanting to I think either sell that or do some other things with it, and the licensing didn't quite work out. I did wind up. We did an episode of like a sort of stitched together program that came a bit later, where I got to dance along as and that was my way of participating. I also did a musical number shortly thereafter that. I think that was Farewell from the Beyond or Farewell from the Darkness, where I did a parody of Mellow Yellow, where it was the King in Yellow. And so that had the whole cast dancing along. They call him King in Yellow, which was a lot of fun.
And you've made some appearances at Necronomicon in
Yeah.
Providence.
So that is I've been out there twice. That and I've been to, let's see now. I did Necronomicon 2013 and 2015. I did the HP Lovecraft Film Festival in Portland and the Cthulhu Con in Portland, and then a different HP Lovecraft Film Festival down in San Pedro. And then I've done a couple of Ohio conventions. And those are fantastic. Like I love being around those folks, being around that kind of community that I mostly know online, and getting to meet folks in the flesh and talk and drink and just celebrate, occasionally get exercised. It's a ton of fun, and it's a real thrill. And I'm hoping now that we're sort of, pulling out of the worst of the sort of pandemic mode, that I'll get an opportunity to kind of go back out and do more work with them while I still fit in the suit. That'll be the one rate limiting step. But doing the live shows is so fantastic because it's such a different experience from the web series, right? Where I'm curating a question, I'm spending time thinking of an answer, and then I'm putting together a sort of a long form 2 or 3 minute answer. With a live show, I don't know what's coming, and I might come up with a 5-second response that's very quick and snappy, or it might send me down this like long rabbit hole of just really diving in deep and having a ton of fun. But it's a bit like, being in an old timey saloon and having folks shooting at your feet. It's exhilarating, but it's also very terrifying.
What was the one program, Lovecraft Around the World, that you were involved with?
So that was a panel, I believe, where we were talking about sort of, Lovecraft and the responses to Lovecraft internationally. I don't know. I feel like there were 2 Canadians on that program, so I guess we were there to represent the true North. And yeah, doing these panels is also, kind of a you never know what's going to come up. You don't know what questions folks are going to have at you. You're sort of trying to have these conversations, but also at the same time, having sort of back and forth with the audience. I enjoy them. They can be a lot of fun. I think there was one we did out in the HP Lovecraft Film Festival where it was like kind of a potpourri. It was just meant to be like anything that doesn't fit on any other panel, like you can come and ask your questions here and we'll try to address them. we were the etc. experts. And that was a big blast, although again, also kind of nerve-wracking.
And you also performed before George R.R. Martin.
Yes. So that was a career high for me. And it started off, I was convinced it was a phishing scam. I got a Facebook message from someone just being like, hey, we've seen your work and we think it's really interesting. We'd love for you to come out to George R. R. Martin's theater and perform. I'm like, okay, this is not a thing. This is someone who has done just a modicum of research and knows how to get my social security number. And I was like, but I gotta, I'll see. And so I tentatively responded back and found out it was legit. And sure enough, found myself going out to Santa Fe 2 times and getting to perform for George R. R. Martin and Melinda Snodgrass and just it was a dream. It was a dream getting to perform like that. Getting to be in the presence of someone who had been a literary hero of mine for years. I read Tough Voyaging way back and in high school, and was one of the early folks to really get into Game of Thrones. I mean, I remember literally making nothing Jon Snow references back in the early 2000s and getting like blank stares from people like, what, that's not a thing. So to get the opportunity to not only just interact and talk and visit with him, get the grand tour of his whole scene there, but getting to perform and answer questions and as Lovecraft, sort of it was one of the most exciting venues I've had.
Did he ask you a question?
Oh, I'm sure he did. I want to say what he mostly wanted to do was talk about his role-playing characters. He wanted to tell me all about like his Call of Cthulhu characters, and and when George R. R. Martin wants to talk gaming, you listen.
Did you happen to ask about like when he's going to get Game of Thrones done?
And no, I felt I felt no need to. It was interesting though because he talked about the Lovecraft connections in the Game of Thrones. Like there's stuff that's like little Easter eggs here and there that he threw in. I think there's again, like it's technically chambers. I think there's like a Carcosa that's like on the eastern continent or something, buried away somewhere. So a lot of there was just a lot of fun, and it was a great time. And I was that was a bucket list beyond bucket list moment, something I could never have expected, and I'm incredibly grateful that Lovecraft earned me nothing else. It earned me that.
So why did you decide just to quit it then?
So as I mentioned earlier, I had gone down to one episode a week as my schedule just became a bit more demanding with kids and being a village mayor. And I wanted to be able to finish the program on my own terms, sort of not just watch interest dwindle or find myself just unable to do it for any number of reasons. I wanted to be able to plan out the ending, and I was coming up on 10 years. I knew that June 2022 would be the exact decade mark, and so that was a clean, easy number that was sort of easy to explain to folks. And so yeah, around Christmas of 2021, I started to kind of get things set in motion, and laid out kind of the what I wanted to end on and what I wanted my final episodes to sort of touch on. And it just so happened that right towards the end, someone sent in a question about like, oh, you've asked, you've answered all this stuff. What have you learned in this time? And that was such a perfect, what have we learned, Charlie Brown kind of question to have as kind of my final question. And then I knew for a while that I wanted to do something with his grave, because I'd never really, I talked about Lovecraft's grave, and his burial site, although it's shifted. So I don't know if the grave actually marks where he's buried right now. But I'd never been able to get out there, even when I'd been to Rhode Island, because it's getting to Swans Point is a bit of a to do. And so, but I had a friend who lived in Rhode Island, and so I was able to get him to film going to the grave, and then I filmed myself in our local graveyard, and I stitched those two together with the wonder of movie magic, and was able to kind of have a final farewell in character. And it was I was happy. It was being able to kind of tie everything up and put a bow on it in a way where, again, you're not forced out because just you're having a nervous breakdown, or your kids are screaming at you. It was nice to be able to kind of go at my own speed and say farewell. And luckily, luckily I had other projects to kind of keep going. TikTok exploded. So it was weird. Like the moment I kind of announced, hey, I think I'm going to be stepping down, was when the Mayor Lovecraft, my other persona, took off. And I found myself suddenly in this whole other world that was different, but in some ways very similar to what I'd been doing for 10 years. And I'm still kind of playing around in that space and enjoying what that all offers. And I've got a celebrated podcast, sci-fi podcast, Moon-Based Data Out, that we're now on the fourth and final season of that. That's been a ton of fun. I've really enjoyed doing that. I've been doing more audiobooks and more guest spots on different podcasts and things like that. And so, I'm still able to use that part of my brain that, still thinks that precious moments or babies are the funniest thing in the world. And that's as long as I can keep that going, as long as my pineal gland keeps squirting, I'll keep putting stuff out there.
I understand you're a Nigerian born American. You lived in Canada and then in Ohio.
Yes. I guess that's why they put me on the international panel. My folks were missionaries. My parents were missionaries in West Africa. So that's where I was born and that's where I grew up. And we bounced around from there to Tennessee. And then I came to Ohio for college, went to Canada for a number of years with my wife. And then we came back to the same college town, and I became mayor of my college town, which is a weird sentence to utter. and it's been a really exciting adventure.
And
And
that's a Gambier. Is that how you say that name? Gambier,
yeah,
Ohio.
Gambier. That's right, Gambier, Ohio.
And you've
And
been
I have two kids who are incredibly dangerously energetic, and I'm excited to sort of see, to see kind of where their adventures are going to take them and go. That's my biggest job right now, more than anything else.
I'm curious, what part of Tennessee did you live in?
Nashville,
Nashville.
Tennessee.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
right.
you're not too far from us then, or you weren't. We're real close to the Tennessee state line. So
Oh, there we go. Yeah, well, so my folks are I sort of grew up in Dixon County, and as well as, and sort of bounced back and forth between Dixon and Nashville. I went to school in Austin P, which is sort of up there. That was where I did grad school. Yeah, so I've bounced around the state a little bit, although there's a lot of it. I drove from Florida to Nashville and realized, oh right, Tennessee is really long. Like there's a lot of more of this state than I remember. I'm used to the north south bit, which is not quite as intimidating.
That's wild. So you served on the city council, right? And then you became mayor.
Yeah, that was the previous mayor was very, very good at what I've discovered is the most important part of this job, which is getting other people involved in municipal government. And so she got me to be on first planning and zoning, which I knew nothing about, and then was like, oh, like this is okay. This has its tendrils in so many different things. Lovecraft could have had a field day talking about a corrupt planning and zoning board infiltrated by cultists. And then from there, I ran for village council. And then the mayor was not looking to run for reelection, and I didn't look like anyone else was going to run for election. So I stepped in and ran and wound up getting elected mayor. And that's been its own strange journey and adventure.
So your wife is a priest and you're a mayor. So you've joked about being a church and state.
We are, yes, precisely. We are the church and state couple. People have also described us as like a BBC murder mystery premise.
Yeah. And I saw one of your the statements about you said that you work to make Gambier a diverse, safe, affordable, beautiful place to work, live, teach, and study in. Have you feel you succeeded?
Yeah, we're doing our part. I mean, I ran for mayor in 2019 and took office January of 2020, thinking, all right, like I know what this job's going to entail. I know what my challenges are. I can't imagine anything happening in the next 2 months that could utterly derail absolutely everything. So, being a small college town, being dependent on the college, there were definitely moments when I sort of were thinking, am I going to be the last mayor of Gambier? But luckily, we've weathered the worst of the storms, and we're still all ticking along. And yeah, it's I'm very proud of the work that we do. We have a fantastic council that I get to work with, a fantastic village staff, and it's an absolute delight just getting to come in. Obviously, there's things that get a little hairy, like when you are called out at 10 o'clock at night because someone's sewage is backed up. Again, the Lovecraftian horrors you never could imagine. But it's an opportunity I never really ever expected, and I'm very honored at the chance to get to serve.
Now, did playing Lovecraft hurt you any? For being a mayor, did people not take you seriously, or?
So I ran unopposed. Which definitely meant that I didn't, my campaigning went from me prepping to have like very serious by the issues sort of campaign to I think just me saying I'm going to be the Garrick of the Gambier. So I did have there have been controversies and there have been issues that have come up. What was great though was we had a really hard time about a year ago, and a lot of sort of I was receiving lots of less than friendly messages and whatnot from folks who weren't happy with what was happening in the village, and a former professor of mine sent who I've gotten to know since coming back, and he's become really dear part of the community. He sent me this note of encouragement throughout all of, right in the kind of the nadir of just everything being really just nasty and whatnot, thanking me for the work that I did and talking about, the support of the community. And he said, I have to imagine your years playing Howard Phillips Lovecraft has prepared you to handle any sort of monsters. And so, this should hopefully not be too daunting for you. And I thought I was not expecting the Lovecraft quote to come from that corner, but it was the perfect thing I needed right then and there. So I'll take it.
So most politicians or businessmen or lawyers, is there anything about being a voice actor or Lovecraft that helped you?
So I'll tell you what's helped me more than anything, and what I think folks should really take to heart is working retail. Working retail will teach you how to handle the public, how to keep your calm and cool when folks are sort of coming at you with a lot of intensity that might seem out of keeping with the stakes. And it also makes you very aware of the small nitty gritty, 1,001 tiny, unglamorous, unsexy bits of business that are necessary to keep the lights on and the water running in the pipes and everything going. I have had people say that my acting experience means that I'm very good in public meetings where someone is sort of shouting at me and I'm able to just sort of nod and smile along. But again, that's also years of working in retail, and being in a bookstore around Christmas time and having someone scream at you because you don't have the right copy of The Hobbit for sale. So
I also read where being a game master also helped you.
I mean, it does. It teaches, because a good game mastering is all about good time management, and that is also a crucial element of being a mayor and keeping things going.
So, do you plan on running for re-election?
I got to make that decision. Next year is when my current term runs out. So I have about 6 months before I have to officially decide one way or the other. So we shall see. I'm curious if other folks will come out of the woodwork. If I've inspired people, you find a lot of folks get involved in local politics out of spite because they're really angry at what the previous mayor did. So I'm curious to see if I have similar challenges and what they suggest about my tenure.
Yeah. Do you have any higher aspirations, being governor or president, anything like that?
At the moment, I'm needed here, and I'm happy to be here.
Yeah,
if I have any higher aspirations, it's probably to host late night monster movies on cable television.
I don't know. President Lovecraft has kind of a neat ring to it. Would you encourage other people to run for office?
Absolutely. I think we need a lot of different voices in local government. And the sad truth is, for a lot of positions, particularly in local positions, they either are run unopposed, like in my case, or people don't run for them at all. And there are so many ways to get involved, so many avenues that you can make sure your voice is heard. And even if you don't run for office, there's tons of boards and commissions that are always in need of folks, always need people to help out, whether you're interested in education, the environment, infrastructure, the trees. We just revitalized our tree commission here in the village. And it's whatever you're interested in, even if it's national or international, there's a local connection, and there are so many ways to get involved and so many ways to lend your voice and your manpower and ability to put your shoulder to the wheel and make your world and your community a much better place.
Yeah. One of your goals is to make Ohio seem less boring to people. So what is one of the things you can brag about Ohio and Gambier?
I mean, Gambier is such this strange little bit of Gothic architecture and this kind of Oxford inspired college that was ported over like stone by stone from England to be this kind of throwback to traditional English college life. But it's gone on to become such this more interesting, weird, fun, diverse place, in this intervening, 2 centuries since then. There's a reason why, I came to Gambier as a 17-year-old, and there's a reason why I came back, over a decade later. And, there's a lot, and Ohio is full of these weird little pockets and corners and bits of strangeness. My Always Has Been show is, it's poking fun and doing kind of, weird face bits of strangeness and lore. But then like you'll come across Grandpa's Cheese Barn or the Hell is Real sign and, realize that there's a lot of weirdness. Though I mean, same with Tennessee. Tennessee is chock full of weirdness. You just follow the kudzu and see where it grows, and you'll unearth all sorts of uncanny secrets.
Yeah, I saw where if Wikipedia hasn't lied to me, that Paul Newman came from Gambier.
That's that he went to school here. Yeah, we've had a lot of actors come through. Allison Janney, and yeah, Paul Newman is one of our big ones. We Newman's Own pasta sauce and dressing is very easy to find in about a 5-minute radius.
There's one thing about Ohio that gets a lot of praise from libraries. Has one of the best library systems in the United States.
Yes, we make use of our public library system as well as the kind of university library system. And my son has recently become enamored. My 5-year-old son has become enamored with organs, and so we just took out a giant anatomy textbook, which he will be pouring through thanks to this library system. So yes, we are very, very aware of and very grateful for the access to strange tunes.
And I saw you've done some other stuff. You did a promo for the King and Yellow board game. And
yes, that was Carcosa. I think I got that. That's in one of my voice reels. I think I got the name wrong. It's technically called Carcosa. That was made by this game designer who reached out to me. He had seen some of my videos and voice work, so I've done that. He also did a game called Microbrew, which are very different games, and I got to voice the promos for the Kickstarters for that. And like you said, I've really enjoyed. I like being a voice actor. I like being able to make do all sorts of fun, weird, strange things with my voice that I've been playing with for 40 years now. And I'm a board gamer as well, so being able to be in that world and be in that space is a ton of fun.
There's one, I guess, podcaster doing our pod show is Moon-Based Data Out. And
that was so. This is my original company that I was part of in Toronto, and as I began to do more, parenting, I wasn't able to do as much acting and theater, and then of course I moved away from Toronto and wasn't able to do anything with them at all. But the main producer and my main sort of writer, DJ, they wanted to get into podcasting, and they wanted to sort of do a kind of a prototype experimental podcast just to kind of test out and the equipment to play with editing and uploading and all that stuff. We were meant to just be this kind of proof of concept, very, very small project. And that wound up exploding. That the Moon-Based Data Out, it's had, the first season was just me. The idea of a guy trapped by himself in the moon, recording these little missives. And, season 2, we were able to bring in a bigger cast and sort of explore more of the moon base. Season 3, we got even bigger. And now we're in season 4, and we've got this cast of dozens of folks, from on Earth and on the moon and all over the place. And we're having a ton of fun. And I'm really amazed at the response to it. I'm so grateful that folks connect to it as they have. And again, endings are always sad. It's sad that it's the end of this project so soon after Lovecraft also kind of came to an end. But I'm grateful I've had this opportunity and excited about what comes next.
All right, and everything you want to add? Okay.
I enjoy the TikToks. I do get to see those quite a bit. So.
Oh, thank you so much. That's been, I signed up for TikTok mostly so that I could annoy my wife, because she uses it she uses it way better than I do, because she actually engages and has all sorts of has created all sorts of community that way. So I wanted to be able to come in and make snarky comments. And then I was like, well, while I'm here, I might as well make a video or two. And they took off and found a very different audience. It's been interesting though to see the folks who were like, wait a minute, you're that guy from that YouTube show. Right. People were like, I remember when you were on Channel Awesome. That's been the best though. I've had a number of folks who recognize me because a decade ago, I filmed these educational videos for med schools about appropriate communication in a medical setting. And apparently those videos are still being shown. It's like a Goofus and Gallant. I do this is the wrong way to communicate, and this is the right way.
Wow.
And so I'll have people be like, "Wait a minute, I just saw you in my med class." I'm like,
Yeah.
"Yep, that's me, baby. I'm not getting any checks for that. Let me tell you what.
Nice.
Yeah, no royalties or anything.
I
Oh,
did
that's
I did
cool.
not sign the right contract for that."
There was I like to explore words, and they're like get mentioned in certain of your shows and all that. And there was one word that you mentioned in one called penemy.
Was that my the instead of a pen pal, you need a penemy?
Yes, you're talking about a penemy.
Yeah, precisely. If you're gonna take the time to put someone on blast, don't just do it in a comment. Really, commit. So
And there was a word that kept popping up all the time when you're doing moon-based theta. It's tardigrades.
oh man, yes, that is all DJ. DJ became obsessed with tardigrades, and I mean they're great. Who doesn't love a water bear? But yes, that's its become its own strange running gag, and we have it on all sorts of merch and water bottles and anything your heart desires. Yes, that is, we love our tardigrades over at Moonbase Data.
All right. Well, thank you for your time.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And before we wrap up, I want to give a few notes. Our past interview with Kenneth Phage was our highest rated show yet. We doubled our ratings with that one.
Well,
And Phage reported back that we mispronounced the name of the town. It's Haverhill, Massachusetts. And Sean Donnelly, the author of a biography on another member of Lovecraft Circle, W. Paul Cook, also responded, "Dear Mark, Kenneth Phage sent me a link to your interview about and of Edith Minotaur. I listened to it last night, and I think it's terrific. Ken is Minotaur's greatest champion, and no one else could have made such a good argument for the enduring value of her literary work and her place in the life of H.P. Lovecraft. The wealth and detail that he can recall in all aspects of her life and her work is remarkable. I'm so glad that Ken agreed to be interviewed. After listening to him speak for over an hour so easily about his favorite subject, it only confirmed my belief that Ken knows 100 times more about Minotaur than anyone else does." And for listeners of the podcast, you're going to get a new treat. Lloydicus has created an outro for us called Providence, and you'll be here for the first time on this episode. Unfortunately, we'll be here for the live raw feed, but we will include a link to it so you can listen to it. David Richard, Mr. Kessler, or ask Miss Lovecraft. I see the stars are no longer right. We must cease all discussions until they align again next month. 30 plus minutes of H.P. Lovecraft is sponsored by the Lovecraftian Sugar Eating Contest. See if you can eat 10 times your body weight. This podcast was created in association with the LovecraftPod.com and Logan Speculative Fiction Group, with help of the Logan County Public Library and the Great Old Ones. Special thanks to Katie Tyson for not being the dimwit of the den, and Joshua Dukes for paying the video that killed the radio star. Until we meet again, may you avoid Princess Cthulhu, who once asked Lovecraft how many shoggoths can dance on the head of a pin.